my mother and father's name. My father's name was Philip Ray Ewell, and my mother's name was Louise Rieske. I was born in Provo, what they tell me, during the Depression in '31. And they had a hard time trying to make a go of it. And my mother said she finally got a job at a restaurant as a waitress, and she made $1 a day. And Dad couldn't find any work, and they didn't have hardly any money, just that $1 a day, and so they didn't have much food. And they said when I grew up, they wondered how I ever was normal, because all they had to feed me was fried potatoes. I guess we lived in Provo for a little while. When I was little, and then at some point we moved to Nephi, where my dad got a job at the mine down there, and we lived in Nephi for, well, until I was 9 years old, I think. And I had some friends down there, and I still remember that. It was interesting. I remember I had a friend, his name was Lynn Hall, and they had a big farm and raised cattle and stuff, and they also raised bees. And one time when we were young, why, they had these beehives sitting around, and we went and got a little mischievous and threw rocks at the beehives. And boy, the bees really got mad, and out they come, and they come after us. And me and my friend, we run and outrun them and got away from him, but his little brother couldn't, and he just got stung all over his head, and his head swelled up big as a pumpkin. Remember that. I always had to have something to do down there, so some of the older kids around the neighborhood said you could catch pigeons at night if you went to these big old barns that was around. The pigeons were roosting in there, and you take a flashlight, shine it in their eyes, and you could pick them right up. And so I did, and I got a bunch of pigeons. And we had a little old chicken coop there on the place where we lived, and I put them in there, and I raised pigeons. And I didn't have anything to feed them, and in Nephi there was a flour mill. It was kind of like the Lehigh flour mill, and when they ground the wheat and that into flour and everything, why, I guess some of it fell through the cracks in the floor, and it built up underneath there, and I'd go down there with a bucket or something and get this wheat, take it home, feed my pigeons. I remember that. When I was about 9 years, I remember going to school down there a little bit, but not very much about it. But my dad did make a pretty good living there working at the mine. And they were finally able to buy a new car. They bought a lot of used cars, and they was all junk. But finally they saved enough money, they bought a new car, and bought a brand new 38 Chevy. And I guess after a while, why, they closed that mine or something happened. it was a gypsum mine that they make. They mined the stuff that they make sheetrock out of. There was a mill there in the mouth of Salt Creek Canyon where there was a tram come down off the mountain to the mill where they ground the rock up or something into this gypsum that made this board. But I guess they finally closed that at some point, and I don't know enough about that. And so it was about the time the war was starting, I guess, the Second World War, that we moved to Pleasant Grove on a little place there, about an acre, and it was a wonderful place. It had fruit trees and raspberries and every kind of fruit you can imagine, and had a big chicken coop on it, and they got chickens, raised chickens, and eggs, sold eggs, and we got a milk cow, and it was kind of a mean milk cow, a Jersey, but it sure had nice milk and cream. And then she had a calf, and we raised her, and so we had 2 milk cows. And after a while, I got to be a teenager, and I had to milk the cows every morning and night. This old cow was a kind of a nervous old gal. I used to put the hobbles on her all the time, because every once in a while she'd decide to kick. And I remember one time, I can't remember if I didn't put the hobbles on or what, but she got jumping around while I was trying to milk her, and she stepped right in the milk bucket. And my mother wasn't too happy about that, losing the milk. I remember that. But it was an interesting life there on that place, and then when I was about, I don't know, 10, 11 years old or so, they used to raise a lot of strawberries in Pleasant Grove, and the kids, they'd come around and pick you up in the morning about 5 o'clock and go pick strawberries. And my sister got a job. She was old enough, and she'd go to work, and after a few times that, I told Mom that I wanted to go. She said, well, you're too young, you can't go. And I said, I can do that, I can go pick strawberries. And so one morning when the guy come around and picked my sister up, she went out and talked to him, said, the boy here, he wants to go try to pick strawberries. He says, oh, he's too little and too young. And she said, well, he'd really like to go. Why don't you just take him and try and see what he does and everything. And so I got to go pick strawberries, and man, that was really something. And we got, it seems like they paid us 15 cents a case. Was it something like that? Or was it a dime? I don't know. 15 cents a case to pick strawberries. And it wasn't long after I started there that I was picking more strawberries a day than anybody that they had. And we saved her money, and I wanted a bicycle, and my sister did too. And so we put our money together, and we saved, I think it was $21 it cost. And we went over to Sears and Roebuck and bought a bike. Remember that. Well, you're wondering about my baptism. My parents weren't active in the church. In fact, my mother wasn't a member of the church when I was born, and for a number of years. And I can't remember much about it because I was so young, but at some point when they lived in Nephi, don't know, the bishopric or the missionaries or somebody got a hold of them, and she joined the church. She was baptized. But I can't remember ever going very much, maybe once or twice, but I can't ever remember going to church, and I didn't know anything about it. Wasn't taught anything about it. And I can remember when I got about 12 years old or so, I had friends that used to go to primary, and they asked me if I wanted to go a time or two, and so I did. And I know for a couple of years or so there I went to primary. I think I graduated from primary and I wasn't a member of the church. But we didn't learn a lot about the church at primary in them days. I learned the apostles and the prophet and who they were, and that's about all I can remember. But at some point before that, I can remember, I guess when my friends asked me, "Are you a Mormon?" And I said, "I don't know. What's a Mormon?" And I'll never forget that. I didn't know whether I was or I wasn't. But anyway, I finished primary, and I can remember my teachers, and they were good teachers, all of them. And we had a teacher that lived up the road from us a couple blocks. Her name was Gertrude Richards. And I can remember one time I was at home, and she come to the house there. She knew Mom and Dad, and she was kind of friendly with Mom, and she stopped there one day, and this was after I think I was out of primary, and she said to Mom, "Did she ever think that maybe I ought to be baptized?" And I was there, it seems like, and Mom said, well, I guess it'd be all right, but she didn't know, and kind of left it up to her. And so I remember she made arrangements when they were baptizing kids. I think it was on a Saturday, down in the old tabernacle. And I can't remember how I got down there, but my parents didn't take me. I walked, I guess I walked down to the tabernacle myself. And I didn't really know what I was doing, and they had young priests in there, I remember, and they baptized me. And in those days they didn't confirm you at that time, and they did that at the sacrament meeting on Sunday. And I didn't know what sacrament meeting was or anything about it, because I'd never went to church, so I was told that I had to go to church at a certain time. It would be sacrament meeting, and they'd have to confirm me. And so I walked down there and went to church again, and I guess the bishop called me up, and they confirmed me a member of the church. And I don't remember ever going to church much after that.
How old were you when you were baptized?
What was I, dear? 12 or 13?
I think he was 12.
So if it hadn't been for a good primary teacher, why, that showed some interest and some caring, why, I don't know if I'd ever been baptized. And so I was always grateful for her, and we lived down there by them, and they were good people. I always liked them. And then after picking strawberries and getting a little older in that way, I started picking fruit for, there was always a lot of fruit farmers in Pleasant Grove, and I always went and picked fruit for them. Picked cherries and apples. I don't know, when I was about 14 or 15, why one of the farmers, Albert Besant, come down one day and said he wanted to hire me. And he always hired one or two kids from town, and they worked for him full time all during the summertime. Weeded and picked fruit and whatever had to do on his farm. And so he hired me. And I went and worked for him for a couple of years or so. And he paid me 35 cents an hour. I thought I was in seventh heaven then. All that money. And he was kind of a funny old guy, and he said, when I first started working, he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you 35 cents an hour, or I'll give you a penny an hour, and I'll double it every day or something. Which would you rather have? So I'll take 35 cents an hour. But later on, when I got a little smarter about arithmetic, I figured out I would have made a lot more money. And he always did that to everybody, kind of as a joke, to see how smart they was. But I worked a long time for him, and up during the war. I remember the war, and I picked a lot of cherries for people. I remember he had a lot of cherries, and the cherries come on one time when I was older, and he said we had to pick the cherries, and he was paying me 35 cents an hour to pick cherries, and the going rate for picking cherries was 4 cents a pound, and I knew that. And I finally figured out, why should I pick cherries for him for 35 cents an hour when I can pick them for 4 cents a pound? And there was a guy that lived near him that had a big cherry orchard, and he wanted me to come pick cherries for him. So I quit this guy and went and picked cherries for him. And I picked over 500 pounds a day of cherries. And you see, that would be $20. And that was 2 or 3 times as much my dad was making. I think he was getting 75 cents an hour where he worked. And wow, I was really in seventh heaven then. Made a lot of money, but of course it didn't last very long because the cherries was over with. But I always liked work and wasn't afraid of work, and realized if you want to get ahead, why, that was part of life, and was grateful for the opportunity always from the little kid on. Well, I had a friend there in Pleasant Grove that went to school with. He lived up the street from me a ways, a couple of blocks, and we went to school together there until he was about in the, I think, the 8th grade or something like that. And he moved away and moved up to Highland, Utah. And I never did see him much after that, occasionally, but not much. And when I got about 16 or something, I can't remember how come we met. He came or I went up there, or I don't know how we got together anyway, and of course we was getting kind of interested in girls by then. And wasn't brave enough to ask a girl out or anything like that, but But anyway, he said he had a friend. He called her a friend up there, and he had a girl that I guess he dated at that time. And should we go on a date together? And I said, well, I don't have any girl to go with. And he said, well, I'll tell this girl about you and get her to go with you. And so I said, well, okay. And so I'd never seen her or talked to her or anything. And I can't remember how we got there. What car did we go in? I can't remember that.
Your parents' car.
I guess I talked to my parents and let me take the car. And we went I went up there and knocked on the door, and I was shaking like a leaf. And she come to the door, and I don't know whether she'd be fat or ugly or what she'd be. And that's how we met. And we went on a date. And geez, I really liked her. And I think she liked me too, but we dated a few times. I can't remember how often. I remember shortly after that it was strawberry days here, and I remember taking her to strawberry days. And I continued to date her, see her all the time. In fact, probably too much. She didn't like it because I never had any way to call her or phone her or anything to make dates or anything. And so I would just go up there, and she didn't like me to just drop in. I remember, and I got this car finally. I bought this, my neighbor down the street, this old guy had this car, and it was a 29 Plymouth convertible. And it never had many miles on it. He hadn't drove it very much. And he never drove it anymore, and so I talked him into selling it to me, and I bought it for $50. And I got it running, and then I used to drive that up there to see her. I remember going up one time, it was pheasant season, and I had this old dog called Treve, and he used to ride in the seat beside of me, and we went up there pheasant hunting. I thought, well, I just will stop and see her while I'm up there. I can remember pulling up there, and my old dog was sitting in the seat beside of me. I don't know what she thought about it. She thought I was nuts or something.
I was very embarrassed because I was outside hanging up the laundry, and I hid behind the sheets so I seen you.
But we continued to date and got closer and everything. We liked each other and everything until went to school. I left a time or two, went over there to see her at her school. I think she'd come over to my school too a time or two. I can remember sitting in history class.
One time.
I was sitting in the history class, and it was right by the highway right there. I happened to look out the window, and there goes my car up the road. And I couldn't figure that out. By that time, I had a 34 Ford coupe. A really snazzy little car, and it was quite fast. And that's what she had. She'd come over here, and it never had a key in it. It had a switch that you had to flip just a switch, and you could start it. And she knew that, and she got in that, and the way she went. I don't know what she was thinking, but
But I didn't know you'd seen me. I brought it right back.
Anyway, we dated quite a lot, and about 3 years or so there, we got out of high school. I think we fell in love gradually. And then, and I thought we were going steady. And she didn't. And I remember talking about that with her, or something about going steady and all that or something. She said, well, she didn't want to because something about she wasn't sure that I was the right one, and she wanted to go with a lot of guys to see who would be the right one, and so she did. And I didn't like it. And she went with a lot of guys too, several. But I kept coming back, and if I'd have been normal, I guess I'd have just quit and wouldn't went up there anymore. But I liked her so much that I wanted to keep seeing her and that, even if she didn't like me. But she did like me, but she liked everybody. She liked the other guys too.
That's so much fun.
And of course, this is my version of it, and she'd have another one probably. But that's the way I remember it from my side. And finally, we did get steady and going together. And we graduated from high school finally, and I was in the National Guard, joined the National Guard, and had an opportunity to go full-time in an Army school back in Washington, D.C. And so I decided I'd do that. There wasn't any work around, and to get a job was really hard. And I thought maybe if I went to this school back there, I could, it was a construction equipment school, I could learn something and maybe have an opportunity to help me get a job. So I left and went back there to that school and left her, and wow, that was really hard to leave her. And
Got engaged first.
did we? She says we got engaged first, and I can't remember that, but anyway, she worked, about that time you worked at the telephone office, didn't you? She was a telephone operator. She had a good job there, and I can remember being back there at school, and we wrote letters back and forth, and it seemed like that she, in the letters, in the communication, she said if I knew where there was a phone, and of course there was pay phones somewheres on the base there where I was, and if I could get the number of that pay phone off of that phone and give it to her, why she could ring that. If I would be there at a certain time, why she'd ring that, and I'd pick it up and it'd be her. And of course I couldn't do that in the daytime because the Army had me busy going to school and everything. I couldn't do that. So I remember, I don't know how many times we did that, but several times, and I have to get up in the middle of the night at midnight and go down there and stay by this phone. And she'd ring it. I don't know how, whether we had to pay or what we had to do, but it was a pay phone.
I just called from my work. Picked up things down with here. As I said, I was the operator. I just did it.
So anyway, a few months went by, and I finally got out of the school and come home, and we got dating pretty heavily, and finally decided maybe we ought to get married. No?
We couldn't wait for you to come. We knew when you was coming home we were going to get married. We didn't have to.
Did we?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, I guess we did.
Already engaged.